Hello, and welcome to another episode of Global Tantrum. I am your host, Steve Palley. With me, as always, my co host, Professor Galen Jackson. This is the show where two or more political scientists attempt to explain the post war global order first to ourselves and then hopefully to you. Galen, how are you doing? That was a heck of a finals game last night, was it not?
I'm doing a lot better than the San Antonio Spurs, man. How are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm doing okay. Epic collapse, historic collapse, in fact.
I believe it was the largest comeback, not just in finals history, but in NBA playoff history, I think
That's
someone
rough.
said.
Yeah. It's funny. The first half, it looked like the Knicks were dead on arrival. Second half, still dead on arrival, honestly. But yeah, they found a way to lose the Spurs. Now they're up against it. Young team. We'll see.
I agree. And those of you familiar with his musings about San Antonio would understand why this is a dangerous comment. But I agreed with Charles Barkley's take, which was the Spurs were just unbelievably dumb in how they played the second half. They played very badly. They only scored 30 points. I still think that should have been enough points to win the game. Said, give the Knicks a lot of credit. They didn't quit. And my guy, OG Anunoby, he did it.
Did. Yeah. Like the way he flew in was incredible.
Yeah, shot 7 of 9 from three, is their best defender.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think the series is over because basketball is crazy, but
It is
it's
crazy.
going to be tough for them to climb out of that one, even though they have a 7-5 alien on their team.
Totally. I also really like how it's dovetailing directly into the World Cup. So, it's the finals will wrap up hopefully not too soon, but relatively soon, and we go straight into watching the U.S. national team disappoint us. So that'll be fun too.
I'll defer to you on that one, man. I don't have a lot of soccer knowledge, so
Yeah, I have more than I did because of my son being extremely interested in the beautiful game. And my understanding is the U.S. team has rearmed and reloaded since the last World Cup. That's my transition
yeah, I
for
knew it
this
was coming,
show.
man.
Yeah, yeah, a little transparent, but yeah, it's okay. We are going to be talking about rearmament today and sort of the arms industry more generally and arms procurement and why the United States seems to be having some problems in this area. And the way we're going to frame this is by first talking about the war that we just saw between the United States, Israel on one side and Iran on the other, and noting that the U.S. burned up quite a few extremely expensive weapon systems trying to establish its political goals and failed to do so. It established a lot of completed a lot of the military goals, blowing stuff up. We blew up all kinds of stuff in Iran, but we didn't win the war or gain our objectives. And now we're left kind of holding that bag. The Strait of Hormuz is still being closed.
Yeah,
Although,
and the shooting seems to have recommenced as well.
yes, that's right, as we thought it might. And, this is going to be like an on again, off again affair probably for a while. We're not talking about that, though. We're talking about the fact that we depleted a lot of our key offensive and especially defensive weapon systems try to do this, right, Galen? And you pulled up a graphic from CSIS, was it?
Yeah, highly recommend looking at it, although it's sort of in the weeds. But suffice it to say, it goes over about 7 offensive and defensive weapon systems, the real high value stuff in the U.S. military arsenal. And the striking takeaway was that in just about 40 days of war with Iran, which, compared to China, for example, is a relatively middle power, the United States used up something like half of its precision strike missiles and half of its interceptors. And it is going to take anywhere from, if you're extremely optimistic, a year, but more likely somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 years just to replenish those stocks, which were already not seen as entirely sufficient for, say, World War III in the Indo-Pacific.
That's crazy. 3 to 4 years to build a missile. Like this something that blows up. It's like
Yes.
we're building hyper precise, incredibly sophisticated, like Maserati like machines to use in war, to the point where some of these systems cost anywhere from $2 to $15 million a piece. And we'll get into why that might be the case. And they take 3 years to source and assemble. Our adversaries know this, right, Galen? They know that we're going to be vulnerable basically for the next 3 years
Yeah.
because of what we chose to do in Iran.
And, I don't want to make it seem like it's an entirely new problem. The United States obviously lost the Vietnam War. The Soviets were driven out of Afghanistan, as later was the United States, as well as Iraq. But there does seem to be this interesting phenomenon going on worldwide, something we'll probably come back to since the tables seem to have maybe not totally turned, but shifted somewhat, is the Russia-Ukraine war. The Ukrainians are, I don't know if you want to say winning, but certainly doing fairly well, exceeding expectations.
They're not losing.
They're not losing. You could even argue an actor like Hamas, which is still around, even though it had been badly battered, shows the resilience of even non-state actor groups. So there's this interesting thing going on right now where the bigger powers, including technologically sophisticated ones like the United States and Israel, are not really achieving their war aims as easily as one might think. And obviously, this has all sorts of implications. China might be thinking, hey, maybe doing Taiwan won't be as easy. Maybe they'll have the exact opposite conclusion. Hey, the United States just burned up all of its stockpiles.
Now's the time. Yeah.
Maybe this. But it's this interesting situation where, to get to the article you and I read that we're going to kind of use to frame this discussion by Thomas Mankin in Foreign Affairs, he had a line in there about how mass and precision used to be something that really only the United States was capable of doing. And that is very much no longer the case. Even non-state actor groups can leverage some of these things. I was just reading an article a few days ago about how Israel is really struggling against Hezbollah, which is now using fiber optic drones to pretty significant effect. So that's the context. And as you said, the world is rearming. There are some uncomfortable parallels to the 1930s, which I think anyone who has even a slight understanding of history would agree is a cause for concern. So do you want to go over some of his arguments that he made?
Yeah, he is basically making the argument that the United States is entering a more dangerous period of time. In fact, the entire world seems to be entering the early stages of a global arms race. The Europeans are rearming. Our allies and adversaries in Asia are spending more. And in fact, the Department of Defense/War just requested a massive increase in the defense budget from around, I think, $800 or $900 billion a year to 1.5 trillion, which both of us think is completely insane.
Well, 800 billion was already an enormous number. So.
Yes, and this is a much bigger number, almost 2x, especially in light of the conversation we had last week about the national debt. It's like, this certainly isn't going to help, right? And I think neither of us really think that the Department of Defense is going to get 1.5 trillion. That seems pretty unlikely.
I guess if we all decided to eat dog food although I've heard dog food's kind of expensive, so maybe that wouldn't
Getting
work.
more expensive, just like everything else, man. Yeah, it's that Trump inflation. But so the article's point is we need to have the ability to grapple with all of these upper middle and great powers. So countries like Iran, countries like China, Russia, there could be contingencies involving North Korea, not usually considered a great power, but it is a nuclear power. So maybe that gets them in the club. They'd like to be there. And our enemies also coordinate. And so we're going to need both a bigger and more capable military in order to deter these adversaries and then deal with the inevitable wars that are probably going to start anyway, especially if we continue to have political goals pertaining to, counterproliferation, things like that.
Yeah. Which I should say, maybe we'll talk about that another time, but that's we're not going to talk as much about that. That's like a grand strategy discussion about what U.S. objectives should be.
Right.
The other thing he's saying in this article is that the U.S. remains exceptional at quick military operations. Like the United States military is still the gold standard. So if you think back to like exactly a year ago with the Iran strikes and Operation Midnight Hammer or the capture of Maduro in Venezuela, those are extremely sophisticated operations that were conducted exceptionally well to great effect. Those are very different from more ambitious objectives like, I don't know, overthrowing the government of Iran.
Taiwan, for that matter.
Yes, an even bigger one.
Yeah.
And so, one thing I would call it a sort of a tension in the argument is he's saying the military needs to be built for, in effect, be able to do more wars of attrition. And we'll talk about why the U.S. might not be well positioned to do that at the moment. But the United States has never really liked doing wars of attrition. The United States does not like taking heavy casualties. It much prefers, quick, decisive victories where technology can take care of a lot of the problem. The, quintessential example being the 1991 Gulf War. To me, that's like kind of two separate things, though. Like, you need to be able to do these longer wars, which I think we both agree the U.S. is less well positioned than it used to be to do that. But there also has to be the question of political will to do them. And I don't see much evidence that the American people have shifted much on that. But
yeah, not at all. And like the core tension in this article's argument is the argument that we have to do more better. It's like we need to expand across both dimensions. So we have these incredibly fancy world-class weapon systems that take years and years to build. Maybe we can speed that up. But the sophistication of the problems that they're designed to solve is just very, very high. They're like, there's no more difficult problem than ballistic missile defense.
correct.
It's like hitting a fly with a bullet at range. And we can do it. We have systems that do that. But in order to build the missile that does it, you spend millions of dollars across literally dozens of different companies from all over the world, which is why it takes 3 to 5 years to build a single one of these missiles. Meanwhile, if somebody is building a Shahed drone in a bicycle shop out of fiberglass, they can build one of those in a few days, most likely, according to a manual perhaps downloaded from the internet.
For far less money, as we have
Far less,
discussed
orders
out
of
that way.
magnitude less.
Yes.
Yeah. So to whatever extent our enemies have bicycle and boat shops in profusion, it's like, is it in fact the case that we should be spending billions and trillions of dollars on these sublime weapon systems?
Yeah. And if you don't want to do that, you either need to fix the process, which is what we're going to be mainly focusing on today.
Yes.
But you could, in theory, have a less ambitious foreign policy discussion for another time. Or, as he also advocates for, do more buck passing to allies, which really no one's going to disagree with.
Nobody's going to disagree with, but that's another thing the U.S. is not currently well equipped to do.
Correct.
For reasons that we've discussed in the past. So we're kind of on the outs with a lot of allies at the moment. Doesn't mean we'll stay that way. Yeah, okay, so setting aside grand strategy and assuming a similar foreign policy, Why is it that we are having so much trouble picking the military hardware that we need and then procuring? Two separate issues, right?
Yeah. Where to start? I found preparing for this episode fascinating because each problem, and I'm sure I only explored a very small number of them, was a function of like 8 other problems in turn. You know, one of them, just as an example, could be something as simple as doctrine, which, just to nerd out for a second, you've read some of the foundational works on military doctrine by people like Barry Posen. It's like, yes, militaries, if left to their own devices, tend to pursue suboptimal doctrines because they prefer like flashier, sexier weapon systems. They like to do things like, go on offense.
Militaries like to blow stuff up.
Yes, wars of maneuver, things like that. And so in peacetime, if there isn't sufficient civilian oversight, they will tend to pursue suboptimal doctrines. Well, you could argue we sort of have seen that play out in the current war with Iran, where the Ukrainians have really pioneered this new air defense doctrine of layered defenses, which we talked about previously, where, rather than rely on a Patriot missile that's going to take 2 years and cost $4 million, like that's your last resort. You would rather not use that. You could shoot these things down with helicopters or fixed wing aircraft, or even guys on the ground with machine guns. That was all, and I'm not going to be too critical since I sort of was behind the curve on it as well, but that was all something that the Ukrainians had been doing for quite a while prior to the start of the current war. And now we're kind of having to relearn that. So that's one illustration. But the bigger, I think, overarching explanation is something you said when we were talking offline, which is, necessity is the mother of invention. I think that's kind of the big structural issue at play here. And then that manifests in a whole bunch of different ways. So I don't know if you have another example you wanted to refer to, or we can go in a number of directions.
There's manifold examples, right? So if necessity is the mother of invention, then lack of necessity is the mother of waste and inefficiency, right? When was the last time the United States was attacked and fighting for its life? It's been quite a while. Arguably September 11th, right?
It was attacked, but it wasn't fighting for its life after.
Right, but we may have thought it was.
Yes.
And, that prompted some innovations in doctrine, particularly around the use of special forces and some technical innovations as well, right? But that was the last war. And this is a new one. Now we're fighting wars of choice for reasons. Could be good reasons, could be not so good reasons. It seems to depend a lot. And nobody is coming to America and invading us or taking over our eastern provinces and sending our children eastward, as is happening in Ukraine at the moment. Nobody's trying to annihilate us as a country. There is no pressure to innovate. There is a recognizance that we need to innovate, but there's no pressure. When there's no pressure, what do you get? You get bloat. You get corruption. You get financialization. You get consolidation. So, Galen, you were telling me before we started recording that the number of major defense contractors has shrunk basically by like a factor of 10 since the end of the Cold War, right?
Considerably since the end of the Cold War. Which I honestly was not aware of that degree of consolidation. Mm-hmm. There was a famous moment in 1993 where the then Deputy Secretary of Defense, William Perry, hosted something that is known as the Last Supper. And I guess, by the way, I read somewhere that like there's now a movement to like correct what happened there. And it's like called the First Breakfast Movement or something.
It's kind of like Easter and Christmas, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, they could have gone with other labels, man. But basically, like, the Cold War ends, and at this meeting, There's a lot of talk in the United States about the peace dividend. We don't have to spend as much on defense. The Soviet Union's not around anymore. These are heady days. Think of Fukuyama, the end of history. Like
Right.
we won, everything's good. That means that we expect some defense contractors to fail. And that's what was communicated. And as a result, you saw a real rise in consolidation. I was most fascinated in reading about this, that this is a very long-standing problem going back well before the end of the Cold War, that there's kind of these boom and bust cycles, which maybe isn't all that surprising. That the first real case of this happens when the United States demobilizes after the First World War. And the U.S. defense industrial base really doesn't start to heat back up until the Roosevelt administration gets the Lend-Lease Act passed. And then you have the mobilization for World War II. We have seen this problem again and again. And in addition to the bloat you're talking about, there was a New York Times article, which I shared with you, about former Defense Secretary Robert Gates. This is now almost 2 decades ago, basically saying, like, look, these incredibly expensive systems are really cool and they can do all sorts of important things and they might be able to take care of 99% of the problem, but we have way too many problems to be able to rely on that sort of system at scale. And what we really need is more like 75 to 80% solutions that we can scale much more cheaply. And for a variety of reasons, one, we mentioned consolidation, one of them. But of course, this is what defense contractors are going to focus on because this is the most lucrative approach.
It's very profitable.
Is to build these extremely expensive, sophisticated systems. I'm sure part of the Pentagon and the military thinks these systems are pretty cool, like they are, but a lot less focus on sort of these asymmetric, cheaper options that we've seen much smaller powers use to such effect.
That's right. And, so they've had a market to sell into too. All of our allies use Patriot missiles. They work great on a tactical level. On a strategic level, it seems like we're getting passed by. And, we talked about this repeatedly on the show. It's like the Iranians have used ultra cheap precision offense capability to saturate these defenses. And that, like, these drones and missiles have gotten through and hit our allies. Not as much as they would have, but enough to raise questions, such as, is this really the best way to do this? Do we need to be hitting flies with howitzers? Would it perhaps be better to develop our own super cheap offensive capabilities so that we could hit them back and deter them? Maybe that's the way to go, rather than relying on our allies, which are really slow and expensive and not 100%, right? So that's kind of one layer. And then there's another layer having to do with, you talked about Ukraine. It's like the Ukrainian arms industry, in many respects, is outperforming the American arms industry. The Ukrainian, over the course of the Iran war, went to the Gulf Emirates and signed a bunch of deals with them because their systems are proven against the Russians. And they are innovating very, very rapidly because they have no choice. If they do not, they will die. And it has been a great surprise to everybody that they are still in the fight and, in fact, seeming to turn the tide. They did that.
By the way, that works in the other direction, too. I just got finished reading this great book by Afshan Ostavar, Wars of Ambition. I think he starts the book with, guess where Russia has gotten a lot of its drones? From Iran. So the arrow points the other direction as well.
Absolutely. And it's like, why are the Ukrainians outperforming? Because they have to. And we don't have to do any of what we're doing. Like, to whatever extent we're doing what we're doing, in many cases, we're doing it for the wrong reasons at the wrong times in the wrong places. Like, yes, we're exercising the capability and seeing that it's not very good. There's value in that. But then how do we turn around and establish the same sort of ecosystem that the Ukrainians have had to evolve out of necessity? It's like every software engineer, every entrepreneur in Ukraine is now in defense one way or another. They're all working on robots, autonomous systems, air defense, specialized data systems, artificial intelligence, you name it. And they're innovating, and it's a much more competitive ecosystem, real consequences above and beyond how much money they make. It's how many people die and whether or not their country exists. We haven't had that for a very, very long time. And they're sprinting past us, frankly. We see that and we be like, we want to do that too. But it's hard because we have this old system, the old procurement system. We have the giant, defense majors with their lobbyists. We have the giant Department of Defense. Everything moves slowly. There are people in this country trying to change that. There are startups like Anduril, for instance. But it's tough when you are not involved in a fight directly, where you're getting performance data in. It's like you need to actually innovate against the problem at hand, and you need to feel that competitive pressure. And that's simply absent. And it allows major, major inefficiencies to creep into the process. Like above and beyond corruption, it's just inefficient. So, for instance, the F-35 project. The F-35 is one of our most sophisticated stealth aircraft, joint strike fighter, right? Multi-mission, and it's an amazing machine. It costs billions of dollars and takes way too long to develop. There are literally hundreds of companies involved in the creation of this aircraft. And there are multiple layers of subcontractors. So there's the main contractor, then there's, a layer of subcontractors underneath them that make like the main components, like the avionics, the targeting systems, the engines, and so forth, right? Every single one of those subcontractors has its own subcontractors. This is the exact opposite of vertical integration. Those subcontractors are in multiple different countries and continents. So we have to somehow coordinate this, draw it all together, ship the parts to the US. We learned, to our embarrassment and chagrin, that some of the most important parts of the F-35 involving hyper-performant magnets were actually coming from China, a major strategic rival.
I did not know that until you told me that, man.
Yeah, that's a big problem. If we end up fighting them, they're like, okay, no more magnets. And, we know that we have a rare earths production problem.
Yeah.
Right? But if we actually want to get better at this stuff, it's like we have to basically take management of these supply chains out of the hands of private industry, because they're going to respond to market incentives. They're not going to respond to defense incentives. They're going to financialize. They're going to do stock buybacks and make their shareholders richer, because that's what they're supposed to be doing in peacetime, right? They're not going to be investing proactively in fixing these problems. Now, we have some leadership now, actually, in the Defense/Department of War, or Department of Defense/Department of War, who recognize these problems. Hegseth has talked about it ad nauseum. He's trying to solve the problem. There's a Deputy Secretary of Defense, Stephen Feinberg, who comes from Cerberus Capital. It's a private equity guy. And so he has been arm twisting in the area of industrial and supply chain reform, especially. So he is going to these executives one by one and saying, we need more Tomahawks. We need more artillery shells. We will pay whatever it takes. We will sign long-term contracts so you have that certainty level, right?
Which is a big problem as well, right? I mean, the current leadership at the Pentagon, by the way, I don't want to give them too much credit for recognizing the problem.
Me either.
As I said, that Bob Gates stuff is now almost 2 decades old, and I think there was a recognition of this, that predates him. And another thing you're getting at with what you just said, we'll pay for it. This is it. At least my reading of this is that it is not a money problem.
No.
It seems like the system is awash in money. I'd have to go back and look at what, annual defense budgets were during the Cold War. But even if the administration's request for $1.5 trillion does not go through, and we're stuck at the, you know, low rate of 800 billion. I think if you adjusted for inflation, that's still probably more than the U.S. was spending during the Cold War on defense.
Oh,
So
definitely.
it
Yeah.
is not a money problem, really.
It's an efficiency problem, and it's a problem with a lack of adaptive pressure. It's a lack of capitalism, frankly.
You said I just like a few of these problems, like you can see how it like metastasizes, right? Like the
Yeah.
long-term contracts piece was something that stood out from a lot of the reading I did on this, which is like, if you want to achieve economies of scale or, get gains from R&D and things like that, you kind of have to make it worth some of these firms' while over a long term. So doing things like guaranteeing contracts. Now, that of course has its own set of risks for graft and inefficiency, but it does seem like this is a key part of the problem, especially for some of these high-end systems like the Patriots, where the inputs are extremely expensive. You're talking about the supply chains being global. I haven't looked into this in a while, but I remember, from our grad school days talking quite a bit about like when Congress passes these bills, they make sure that like there's like 48 different states
Right.
that contribute to building them so that the jobs are spread to all of their constituencies,
It's
right?
a
It's
pork
like,
barrel thing. Yeah.
yeah,
Totally. That's not efficient. And like, so what's really weird about it, this whole system is like, yes, we allow for this crazy amount of subcontracting to increase like production efficiency. Like it's more efficient in some sense to globalize the production of these things. But when push comes to shove, it's like we're being penny wise and pound foolish, right? Because we have to spend so many resources, like actually gathering the stuff up, coordinating production, making sure that all of these subcontractors aren't like being run by spies and enemies or being stolen from, right? It's just it's very difficult. It's like if we had all of this concentrated in one place in the United States, it's like, yeah, we could actually apply a lot of leverage there. It's a lot harder to apply leverage to like 130 different companies on 3 different continents. It's like we can, like Steven Feinberg can go to Raytheon and jawbone them and like, threaten them and promise them or whatever. But then it's like, okay, my people will talk to now 15 layers of management globally.
yeah.
And we'll make sure that happens for you. It's
It,
going to be a while.
it's especially striking since like it is a case of like the government has monopsony power, right? Like in
Yes.
theory, it should be able to exert all sorts of pressure in this area, but for a variety of reasons, that hasn't happened. I'm curious. I guess I'll just like give the citation. There's a piece in Foreign Affairs now 3 years old, which I found interesting, but like, people were talking about this as a problem going back to the start of the Ukraine war,
Mm-hmm.
when there were all these, references to U.S. production during World War II. Oh, the U.S. is going to be the arsenal of democracy again. And those comparisons have not really been borne out. That's not to say U.S. aid has not been important in some of these conflicts, but we're not talking like the scale of World War II production where, the United States is just producing just unbelievable quantities of global relative output of this stuff.
Importantly, the United States was also a command economy at
Well,
that point in time.
so this is, I thought he makes a number of key points, but we've touched on a few of them already, including the consolidation factor. But it struck me that kind of the heart of this argument, again, written by Michael Breen's in Foreign Affairs, was basically that the government used to own and operate a lot of these firms.
Mhm.
And
They got privatized.
they got privatized, which you could argue, right? Like does sometimes increase efficiency, not always. But the bigger issue is because they were operated, they were aligned with the government's national security imperatives. And so you didn't have as much focus on these lucrative systems, right? And like, if it's the 1980s, again, money not being the problem, President Reagan really raises defense budgets, but we're focusing on these really high-end systems MX missiles, Star Wars program for ballistic missile defense,
The
which as you
Patriot.
were, yep. And as you were saying, the missile defense system doesn't really work. And so it's as much about like accountability and government oversight and maintaining alignment with national security imperatives as it is about graft. Now, like the latter is also a problem, right? Like he brings up I forget what the committee was, but like the discovery that, toilet seats were costing $600 a pop or
Oh yeah.
something like that. So I'm not saying that's not a problem. I'm not saying lobbying isn't a problem. And that's actually what keeps alive investments in some of these obsolete platforms. But yeah, I'm just curious, like your reaction to that argument.
Yeah. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think you have to ask yourself, to what extent is the defense industry an industry? Like, to what extent is it a private business versus a public utility,
Yeah.
right? And the answer to that question really depends on how much pressure there is on the United States at a given time. The United States can mostly afford to stay out of any conflicts that it wants to. Not always the case. Sometimes there's a world war and we have to get our act together, and we do, and we perform very well, right? The rest of the time, it's like there needs to be some source of adaptive pressure, whether that is a government that understands what it needs and why, or whether that is competitive pressure in the broader defense market, not just in the United States, but the global defense market. There needs to be some source. Otherwise, industries get fat and complacent, and we start to have problems like this. I think like the U.S. alliance structure and NATO and so forth has basically not had very much to do for decades, which is one of Trump's criticisms, in fact, of the entire system. It's like, you guys are just drafting off of us. It's like, okay, yes, but that goes both ways. That also means you're on all of our systems, we sell to you, and everybody's happy. Well, guess what? Everybody's not happy anymore. It's
Right.
like, I think we just saw our systems perform well in the Iran war, like in a narrow sense, in a tactical sense, but in a strategic sense, it's like, this is no longer the stuff that people are convinced that they need. So, to whatever extent NATO sticks around, which is another question, it's like the Europeans are spinning up their own defense industries in a big way now, like Rheinmetall in Germany. It's like that was once one of the biggest and most important defense contractors in the entire world earlier in the 20th century. Like, setting aside what Germany did with that stuff, it can be again. And the Germans are serious about investing and being once again, like the defense industrial giant of Europe. There's no reason they can't do it and compete with the United States and make their own Patriot style systems better and cheaper. The Ukrainians are out innovating everybody, including the Israelis, right? It's like these guys are just so advanced and so far ahead of everybody. That's why their country still exists. And they've gotten to the point now where they can actually, they're doing well enough in their hot war that continues to be a going concern. It's like they're fighting and perhaps winning that, and they're making enough stuff now that they can turn around and start selling it externally. So I think the defense majors in this country are about to lose a bunch of customers in the Middle East, or at least have some real competition. It's like, good.
I was going to say that could be a boon to innovation.
Yeah. It's like, we no longer see, it's like, you guys have told us you don't see the value in protecting us. Well, we don't see the value in your military hardware. So screw you. Right? It's like, no, that's actually exactly what needs to happen. It's like, we've had this system frozen in place for a quarter century, and the results are exactly what you'd expect. It's a lack of innovation, a lack of competitive pressure, monopolization, and rent extraction. And
So
ultimately a lack of performance.
I feel like I have like 5 thoughts. I'm
Line
definitely
them up.
I'm going to forget some of them, but I guess I'll start with like So like my first question when I hear this, and especially after like reviewing a lot of this and saying like how long this problem goes back,
Yeah.
that this has really been like a slow moving atrophy, which does not really align with, every single article, even today, about national security starts with the United States might not be like, it's not 1995, but remains like by far the most militarily powerful country. It's like, well, this calls some of that into question. But I guess, like, do you think, I still think about 1991, and granted, that's 35 years ago. But if you think about that war and the ongoing war with Iran, the US does do some incredibly impressive things militarily. There's the obvious difference that with the Persian Gulf War, there's something like 500,000 American ground troops involved, which obviously were not deployed against Iran, but are like, it is two different things, right? It's like the inefficiency and the problems of rearmament and running out of munitions, and also like the political stakes being high enough that you're willing to march all the way to Berlin, or I guess the Soviets got to Berlin first, but you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
to do a full-fledged mobilization of the entire country. So like, are we conflating these things, or
It's
are
it's a
they?
it's a good question. So I think they're related. So one thing to note is that the United States had big stockpiles of a lot of this equipment. We still have just a massive capital stock, and we're producing more. It's slow, but it's like a question of stocks versus flows, right? And the issue, like we can sell out of our stocks or give our allies stocks, but they have an eye on that, and they're like, okay, is there going to be more? Is there like a sustained supply of this stuff? Like, how long is it going to take? And our answer is like 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
It's like that's not what anybody wants to hear, right?
No, it's like the Germans placed an order for Patriots. I don't remember the exact number, but like a few years ago,
Right.
like, right, like we
So
don't even
we have
know
to
when
move
we're
those
going
to
to
the
get
Persian
them yet.
Gulf now.
Yeah, like,
Yeah. And same with the South Koreans. We're like, sorry, we're just gonna take this stuff and leave you with an IOU, right? That's a bad look. So yeah, so like they are separate issues, but I think they're also connected. And as far as performance goes, it's like yes, the systems perform incredibly well at what they're designed to do. Is what they're designed to do still important? That's
maybe.
the question. Yeah, like yes, it is. Yes, it is. But at the same time, there's not enough of it. You know. So
Yeah.
when you talk about like a Patriot versus a Shahed drone on a one to
Yeah.
one basis, the Patriot's going to win. Okay, but we're talking about weapon system versus weapon system. We're talking about hundreds of Patriots versus thousands of Shahed drones. It's like if we had to deal with Shahed drones in the 1990s, the 1980s and 1990s, we wouldn't have designed the Patriot missile. It's like the Patriots were designed for Scuds,
Right.
Soviet missiles,
Yeah.
basically. And we've continued to revise them, and we're up to version 3 or whatever, advanced version 3. We've been doing it for decades. Same basic platform. But it's like, no, that's still a weapon system designed to solve an old problem. It solves the old problem really well, but it's like the tactics have changed. So
Your IOU thing is not helping me think more positively about this. It makes me feel like American foreign policy is running into the movie Dumb and Dumber. See that one? That's a Thad.
yeah,
$4 million. Might want to hold on to that IOU.
totally.
Well, okay. So then the other question is like you've mentioned two different types of competitive pressures that could come out of this, right? So
Yeah,
like more less consolidation, more competition within the United States itself,
yeah,
and then the global competition.
yeah,
And it seems like right now we don't have much of the former, but
yeah,
we are increasingly getting more of the latter.
yes,
I don't know how that plays out based on the sweep of the history that I looked at looking for today. It seems like the U.S. will get its act together once there is a global crisis that involves U.S. core interests. So I'm inclined to think that that's the one that's going to predominate. But do you agree
Yeah.
with that?
That's generally how this goes. But, we talked about this last week. It's like, do we still have the fiscal space to get our house in order
Yeah.
when the global emergency comes and our core interests are threatened? I don't know. It's like it's getting tighter and tighter each time. At a certain point, it's like, yeah, we'll find a way and do it. That's been the historical pattern, probably, but that's no guarantee that the system won't just
Yeah.
shatter into a million pieces because it's so brittle and inefficient. Domestically, this is a great question, and I think it relates to just a larger issue that the American economy has, which is monopolization and consolidation, and that's across industries.
Well, so this was my next question. You mentioned Anduril, like we have other sort of startups or newer company. Like, are you hopeful that those are going to fill some
Disrupt,
of these gaps?
yeah, disrupt. I am hopeful, and I think that a lot of these companies have like pilot programs with the Department of Defense, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Marine Corps. That's great. But the defense majors, they just have so much power. They have so many established relationships. They have the lobbying. They have so much money. We're talking about startups against entrenched incumbents, and the startups have to really go much faster.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if the startups will not ultimately do best outside the United States, where there's more opportunity and more customers. And there's also more competition, right? They're going to be exposed to like the Ukrainians. It's like, can
Yeah.
Anduril outcompete the Ukrainians? I have no idea. I wouldn't put money on it.
So this actually gets, I do want to ask you about, like, I think we should talk about like what is to be done,
Yes.
obviously. First, like when I hear that, I do get back to these bigger questions, I guess, which motivate our entire podcast
Yes.
of like what kind of world we're living in now. Because as my read on like why the United States became a great power in the first place and prevailed in two world wars and the Cold War, so on and so forth, mainly has to do with its economic power
Mm-hmm.
and its ability to leverage its economic system to innovate and
Mm-hmm.
build at enormous scale. Like you go read about what was done during these major conflicts, and it's like kind of boggles the mind the amount of resources that were thrown at the problem and the scientific discoveries and government private sector coordination and all of that, and just like the outcomes in terms of production and resources that could be thrown on the battlefield. And it's just staggering.
Yeah. It's like
And
we provisioned, like multiple armies over long periods of time. We did the Manhattan Project. We rationed the entire consumer economy.
yeah,
It
and
was
I
crazy.
remember, just to nerd out on World War II, since it's, who does that these days? Like, I remember reading about, it's like, well, there were these grand strategic choices. Like, you've got to do things in the European theater of operations. And then in the Pacific, there's this big argument over like whether you go north or south. And basically, we decided, well, we'll just do both
We're gonna do all of it.
because we have that much stuff to throw at the problem.
Yeah.
Um, like listening this discussion makes me feel like that's not necessarily like a special American skill necessarily anymore. Like now, maybe it could become that way again,
It could.
but particularly given the priorities that Americans have, right? Again, we want quick wars. We don't want lots of casualties. We do not want to reintroduce conscription. It does seem to me like maybe we are seeing in a similar way that, the American economy is still the biggest one in the world and the envy of many places, but you have seen power diffuse, that is now happening in the military space as well. Anyway, in terms of like what is to be done, I'll just bounce some ideas off you and see what you think.
Yeah.
Another thing that struck me was that, and this mirrors obviously the decline in manufacturing in the United States more broadly, but the number of the size of the U.S. defense workforce has declined by 2/3
I'm
since the
glad you brought that up.
1980s.
Yeah. That's a big problem.
It's a huge problem.
Yeah. Another reason why we have to outsource all this stuff is because we're missing hundreds of thousands of skilled tradesmen. We're missing tens of thousands of electricians. We're missing hundreds of thousands of shipbuilders. It's like this is not a won't problem. It's a can't problem. There's nobody there. And what's weird is we have this latent blue collar workforce who have been, globalized to death and dying of deaths of despair and all this. It's like, well, it would make a lot of sense to get these guys employed and, do apprenticeship programs and things like that. And people have been talking about this for a while. I don't know that there's been any movement or any traction to speak of.
And I mentioned that in the article by, was it Mike Breen's, right? Yeah. I mean, he said in the 80s that we're talking about more than 3 million people working in that sector.
Defense,
we're now barely over 1 million now.
Yeah.
So, potentially up to 2 million jobs. Who knows?
Seems like a big deal.
That's it. And that seems like one thing. Going back to we've thrown a lot of money at the problem. It hasn't necessarily worked.
Where have we thrown it? We've thrown it into more hyper expensive precision systems that are manufactured elsewhere.
Right. So I don't think either of us is going to advocate, since we're talking, it will fix itself in a crisis. I don't think either of us is saying the United States should jump into a world war to fix its defense industrial base.
Seems risky.
So if we're not going to do that, again, Hegseth is not the first Harry to focus on this problem. So what do you do to get your arms around it in the face of these political headwinds and these misaligned incentives?
Yeah, I don't know. Transparently, it's like I can speculate, but it's a really difficult, intractable. And again, it comes back to, are the defense majors private businesses, or do they have public mandate to some extent to obey what the government wants? It's like, no, this is capitalism, supposedly. So they do as they see fit, sort of. Can we have leadership, civilian leadership in the military, change that to some extent and be like, hey, we're not getting what we need out of you guys. So can we break up the monopolies? Can we do antitrust? Can we, have civilian leaders on the boards of these companies? Can we do a little bit less capitalism and a little bit more command? Or can we do real capitalism and get some competition in here, right?
Yeah.
Some of it has to do with where are the contracts? What are we contracting for? What sorts of systems? If we continue to buy hyper high-end systems that only a handful of companies can manufacture, then this is what we're going to continue to get. I think that's pretty clear. But there are reforms that can be made at every level of the system.
I mean, leaving aside I would say, near political impossibility of doing this, but in theory, if you could snap your fingers and have the federal government once again own and operate this sector, would that be advisable?
Depends on who's in charge of the federal government. Yeah, look, it's not a panacea, right? The government changes every 2 to 8 years, usually, depending on how you look at it, or at least it has historically.
Yeah.
And then we had a long period of continuity during the Cold War where everybody was basically aligned and on board. And it's we need these systems because we have this enemy that is powerful and it's not going away. And we have to fight in these peripheral wars. So that kept the system aligned for a long time. I think when you're just on top and in charge and screwing around, doing things because you feel like it, not because you have to, then you get lazy. I think it's basically that simple. It's way more complicated than that. but high level. So maybe it does start with a government that is serious and intent on reform and getting the United States into fighting shape. And we haven't had one of those for quite a while. I don't know that we will again necessarily. I think it's possible.
Well, I guess I'm going to put a bow on my side of things by saying these last two conversations, depressingly, seem to align with the literature on like great power decline.
Yeah.
And, I do want to say, I think, as we've talked about several times, like the US has all sorts of things it could do. I think it could vitalize itself if it made some smart choices. I think fundamentally we're talking more about political problems as opposed to, for lack of a better word, solvency problems.
Yep.
But I think the political problems have repeatedly reared their head for more or less my entire life at this point, and I'm starting to become pessimistic that they are surmountable. Leaving that aside, like this is sort of the classic story of how great powers get into trouble is overextension, commitments, outrunning your ability to actually uphold them. And we've now had two conversations where, these are the two arguably main pillars of US power, economic and military strength, which obviously are directly related. And I think there's room for pessimism about them at the moment.
I do too. I would agree that I don't think the United States is so far gone that it cannot come back.
I don't think it's anywhere near that point, but like these things are big problems that have to be addressed, and we're not doing that. So
yeah, they're big problems, and it's like, what sort of crisis / opportunity, because crises are often opportunities as well, would it take for this country to really turn things around and kind of like wash out the system and get its house in order and make the obvious reforms? I don't know. Like this is like the blessing and the curse of being an American. It's right. It's like we're so safe and we have every advantage and we don't actually have to do things right. We can afford to be stupid and lazy, in some respects, until we can't.
Yeah, until we can't.
Until we can't. So it's like, what combination of circumstances, right? Is it a Taiwan war? Would that do it? If we decide to like...
I don't think so, leaving aside the fact that like the outcome of that war is not preordained and...
not at all.
I generally don't like competitions involving strategic nuclear weapons.
Totally.
But even if I leave that aside, like war is extremely corrosive to democracy in most cases.
Yes.
And I wouldn't say we're, doing great in that area either at the moment. So
if you're talking about endogenous democratic renewal, though, it's like, where does that come from? I guess it comes from the people just being like, we've had enough and we can cooperate. And we can vote in a unity government, like an actual reform government, whatever that looks like in the context of the United States. It's like a grand centrist coalition. I don't know. Maybe at some point.
Can the center hold?
No, it's not. It's failed. But that doesn't mean it's gone forever. It's like people are getting like just disillusioned and pissed off.
Yeah, and like this is the last thing I'll say, but like this is part of the reason I mentioned, the 30s earlier, right? Is like, we have this world order that is shifting and, there are other states that are, if not on the move, certainly revisionist in their outlook. And I do think this is the time to start answering some of these bigger questions. And maybe next time is the time to talk about like the grand strategic debate.
That would be good. All right, let's leave it there. If you like what we do, like, share, and subscribe. Can you do the podcast thing? Which I often forget to do.
Smash that subscribe button.
Yeah, +1. Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Galen. This has been another episode of Global Tantrum. Till next time.